Welcome, everybody. This is Annette Kennedy with the Evolution, Revolution, and Humanities team. And this is our Conversations with God Book 2 discussion group, and written obviously by Neil Donald Walsh. Neil Donald Walsh, I need to articulate. Anyway, we're going to start reading chapter 18. And if you're ready to start reading, Michelle, go for it. And thank you for doing so.
Chapter 18. Let me see if I'm tracking this. What seems to be emerging here is a worldview of equality and equanimity, where all nations submit to one world government and all people share in the world's riches. Remember, when you talk about equality, that we're meaning equal opportunity, not equality in fact. Actual equality will never be achieved, and be grateful that that is so. Why? Because equality is sameness, and the last thing the world needs is sameness. No, I'm not arguing here for a world of automatons, each receiving identical allotments from a big brother central government. I'm speaking of a world in which two things are guaranteed: the meeting of basic needs and the opportunity to go higher. With all your world's resources, with all your abundance, you have not yet managed those two simple things. Instead, you have trapped millions on the lowest end of the socioeconomic scale and devised a worldview that systematically keeps them there. You are allowing thousands to die each year for lack of simple basics. For all the world's magnificence, you have not found a way to be magnificent enough to stop people from starving to death, much less stop killing each other. You actually let children starve to death right in front of you. You actually kill people because they disagree with you. You are primitive, and we think we are so advanced. The first mark of a primitive society is that it thinks itself advanced. The first mark of a primitive consciousness is that it thinks itself enlightened. So let's summarize it. The way we'll get to the first step on the ladder, where these two fundamental guarantees are accorded to everyone, is through two shifts, two changes, one in your political paradigm, one in your spiritual. The movement to a unified world government would include a greatly empowered world court to resolve international disputes and a peacekeeping force to give power to the laws by which you choose to govern yourselves. The world government would include a Congress of Nations, two representatives from every nation on earth, and a People's Assembly, with representation in direct proportion to a nation's population. Exactly the way the U.S. government is set up, with two houses, one providing propositional representation and one providing equal voice to all states. Yes, your U.S. Constitution was God-inspired. The same balance of powers should be built into the New World Constitution. There would be likewise an executive branch, legislative branch, and a judicial branch. Each nation would keep its internal peacekeeping police, but all national armies would be disbanded, exactly as each of your individual states disbanded their armies and navies in favor of a federal peacekeeping force serving the entire group of states you now call a nation. Nations would reserve the right to form and call up their own militia on a moment's notice, just as your states each have the constitutional right to keep and activate a state militia. And just as your states do now, each of the 160 nation states in the Union of Nations would have the right to secede from the Union based upon a vote of the people, though why it would want to do so is beyond me, given that its people would be more secure and more abundant than ever before. And once more, for those of us who are slow, such a unified world federation would produce: 1. An end to all wars between nations and the settling of disputes by killing. 2. An end to abject poverty, death by starvation, and mass exploitation of people and resources by those of power. 3. An end to the systematic environmental destruction of the earth. 4, an escape from the endless struggle for bigger, better, more. 5, an opportunity truly equal for all people to rise to the highest expression of self. 6, an end to all limitations and discriminations holding people back, whether in housing, in the workplace, or in the political system, or in personal sexual relationships. Would your new world order require a redistribution of wealth? It would require nothing. It would produce voluntarily and quite automatically a redistribution of resources. All people would be offered a proper education, for instance. All people would be offered open opportunity to use that education in the workplace, to follow careers which bring them joy. All people would be guaranteed access to health care whenever and however needed. All people would be guaranteed that they won't starve to death or have to live without sufficient clothing or adequate shelter. All people would be granted the basic dignities of life so that survival would never again be the issue, so that simple comforts and basic dignities were provided all human beings, even if they did nothing to earn it. Your thought that these things need to be earned is the basis for your thought that you have to earn your way to heaven. Yet you cannot earn your way into God's good graces, and you do not have to because you are already there. There is something you cannot accept because this is something you cannot accept because it is something you cannot give. When you learn to give unconditionally, which is to say, love unconditionally, then will you learn to receive unconditionally. This life was created as a vehicle through which you might be allowed to experience that. Try to wrap yourself around this thought. People have a right to basic survival, even if they do nothing, even if they contribute nothing. Survival with dignity is one of the basic rights of life. I have given you enough resources to be able to guarantee that to everyone. All you have to do is share. But then what would stop people from simply wasting their lives, lollygagging around collecting benefits? First of all, it is not yours to judge what is a life wasted. Is a life wasted if a person does nothing but lie around thinking of poetry for 70 years and then comes up with a single sonnet which opens a door of understanding and insight for thousands of people? Is a life wasted if a person lies, cheats, schemes, damages, manipulates, and hurts others all his life, but then remembers something of his true nature as a result of it? Remembers perhaps something he has been spending lifetimes trying to remember, and thus evolves at last to the next level? Is that life wasted? It is not for you to judge the journey of another's soul. It is for you to decide who you are, not who another has been or has failed to be. So you ask what would stop people from simply wasting their lives lollygagging around collecting benefits, and the answer is nothing. But do you really think this would work? You don't think those who are contributing wouldn't begin to resent those who are not? Yes, they would if they are not enlightened. Yet enlightened ones would look upon the non-contributors with great compassion, not resentment. Compassion? Yes, because the contributors would realize that non-contributors are missing the greatest opportunity and the greatest glory, the opportunity to create and the glory of experiencing the highest idea of who they really are. And the contributors would know that this was punishment enough for their laziness, if indeed punishment were required, which it is not. But wouldn't those who are really contributing be angry at having the fruits of their labor taken from them and given to the lazy ones? You are not listening. All would be given minimal survival portions. Those who have more would be given an opportunity to contribute 10% of their earnings in order to make this possible. As to how income would be decided, the open marketplace would determine the value of one's contribution, just as it does today in your country. But then we would still have the rich and the poor, just as we do today. That is not equality. But it is equal opportunity. For everyone would have the opportunity to live a basic existence without worries of survival, and everyone would be given an equal opportunity to acquire knowledge, develop skills, and use his or her natural talents in the joy place. The joy place? That's what the workplace will then be called. But won't there still be envy? Envy, yes. Jealousy, no. Envy is a natural emotion urging you to strive to be more. It is the 2-year-old child yearning and urging herself to reach that doorknob which her big brother can reach. There is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with envy. It is a motivator. It is pure desire. It gives birth to greatness. Jealousy, on the other hand, is a fear-driven emotion making one willing for the other to have less. It is an emotion often based in bitterness. It proceeds from anger and leads to anger, and it kills. Jealousy can kill. Anyone who's been in a jealous triangle knows that. Jealousy kills, envy gives birth. Those who are envious will be given every opportunity to succeed in their own way. No one will be held back economically, politically, socially, not by reason of race, gender, or sexual orientation, not by reason of birth, class, status, or age, not for any reason at all. Discrimination for any reason will simply no longer be tolerated. And yes, there may still be the rich and the poor, but there will no longer be the starving and the destitute. You see, the incentive won't be taken out of life, merely the desperation. But what will guarantee that we have enough contributors to carry the non-contributors? The greatness of the human spirit. Oh? Contrary to your apparent dire belief, the average person will not be satisfied with subsistence levels and nothing more. In addition, the whole incentive for greatness will change when the second paradigm shift, the spiritual shift, takes place. What would cause such a shift? It hasn't occurred yet in the 2,000-year history. Try 2-billion-year history of the planet. Why should it occur now? Because with the shift away from material survival, with the elimination of the need to succeed mightily in order to acquire a modicum of security, there will be no other reason to achieve, to stand out, to become magnificent, save the experience of magnificence itself. And that will be a sufficient motivation. The human spirit rises. It does not fall in the face of true opportunity. The soul seeks a higher experience of itself, not a lower. Anyone who has experienced true magnificence, if only for a moment, knows this. How about power? In this special reordering, there would still be those with inordinate wealth and power. Financial earnings would be limited. Oh boy, here we go. You want to explain how that would work before I explain why it won't? Yes, just as there would be lower limits on income, so would there be upper limits. First, nearly everyone will tithe 10% of their income to the world government. This is the voluntary 10% deduction I mentioned before. Yes, the old equal tax proposal. In your present society at the present time, it would have to take the form of a tax because you are not sufficiently enlightened to see that voluntary deduction for the general good of all is in your best interest. Yet when the shift in consciousness I have been describing occurs, such an open, caring, freely offered deduction from your harvest will be seen by you as obviously appropriate. I have to tell you something. Do you mind if I interrupt? You here to tell you something. No, go right ahead. Oh, sorry. Do you mind if I interrupt you here to tell you something? No, go right ahead. This conversation is seeming very strange to me. I never thought I'd have a conversation with God in which God would start recommending political courses of action. I mean, really. How do I convince people that God is for the flat tax? Well, I see you keep insisting on seeing it as a tax, but I understand that because the concept of simply offering to share 10% of your abundance seems so foreign to you. Nevertheless, why do you find it difficult to believe I would have an idea about this? I thought God was non-judgmental. had no opinion, didn't care about such things. Well, let me get this straight. In our last conversation, which you called Book 1, I answered all sorts of questions. Questions about what makes relationships work, questions about right livelihood, questions about diet even. How does that differ from this? I don't know. It just seems different. I mean, do you really have a political point of view? Are you a card-carrying Republican? What a truth to come out of this book. God is a Republican. You'd rather I be a Democrat? Good God. Cute. No, I'd rather you be apolitical. I am apolitical. I have no political point of view whatsoever. Sort of like Bill Clinton. Hey, good. Now you're being cute. I like humor, don't you? I guess I didn't expect God to be humorous or political, or anything human, eh? Okay, let me place this book, and Book 1 for that matter, into context for you once again. I have no preference in the matter of how you conduct your life. My only desire is that you experience yourself fully as a creative being so that you might know who you really are. Good, I understand that. So far, so good. Every question I have answered here and every inquiry to which I responded in Book 1 has been heard and responded to within the context of what you, as a creative being, say you are attempting to be and do. For instance, in Book 1, you asked me many questions about how you could finally make relationships work. Do you remember? Yes, of course. Did you find my answers so problematic? Did you find it difficult to believe that I would have a point of view on this? I never thought about it. I just read the answers. Yet, you see, I was placing my answers within the context of your questions. That is, given that you desired to be or do so-and-so, what is a way to go about that? And I showed you a way. Yes, you did. I'm doing the same thing here. It's just, I don't know, more difficult to believe that God would say these things than it was to believe that God would say those things. Are you finding it more difficult to agree with some of the things said here? Well, because if you are, that's very okay. It is? Of course. It's okay to disagree with God? Certainly. What do you think I'm going to do, squash you like an insect? I hadn't gotten that far in my thinking, actually. Look, the world has been disagreeing with me since this whole thing started. Hardly anyone has been doing it my way since it began. That's true, I guess. You can be sure it's true. Had people been following my instructions, left with you through hundreds of teachers over thousands of years, the world would be a much different place. So if you wish to disagree with me now, go right ahead. Besides, I could be wrong. What? I said, besides, I could be wrong. Oh my goodness, you're not taking this all as gospel, are you? You mean I'm not supposed to put any stock in this dialogue? Oops, hold it. I think you've missed a big part of all this. Let's go back to square one. You're making this all up. Oh, well, that's a relief. For a while, I thought I was actually getting some real guidance. The guidance you are getting is to follow your heart. Listen to your soul. Hear yourself. Even when I present you with an option, an idea, a point of view, you are under no obligation to accept that as your own. If you disagree, then disagree. That is the whole point of this exercise. The idea wasn't for you to substitute your dependency on everything and everyone else with a dependency on this book. The idea was to cause you to think for yourself. And that is who I am right now. I am you thinking. I am you thinking out loud. You mean this material is not coming from the highest source? Of course it is. Yet here is the one thing you still cannot believe. You are the highest source. And here is the one thing you still apparently do not grasp. You are creating it all of your life, right here, right now. You are creating it, not me. You. So, are there some answers to these purely political questions that you do not like? Then change them. Do it now, before you start hearing them as gospel, before you start making them real, before you start calling your last thought about something more important, more valid, more true than your next thought. Remember, it is always your new thought that creates your reality. Always. Now, do you find anything in this political discussion of ours that you want to change? Well, not really. I'm sort of agreeing with you as it happens. I just didn't know what to make of all of this. Make of it what you wish. Don't you get it? That's what you're doing with all of life. Okay, that's right. All right, I think I've got it. I would like to continue with this conversation if only to see where it's going. Fine, then let's do that. I was about to say that in other societies, enlightened societies, the putting aside of a set amount of what one receives, what you call income, to be used for the general good of the society itself is a rather common practice. Under the new system we have been exploring for your society, everyone would earn as much each year as they could, and they would retain what they earn up to a certain point. What limit? An arbitrary limit agreed to by everyone. And anything above that limit would be contributed to the World Charitable Trust in the name of the contributor, so all the world would know its benefactors. Benefactors would have the option of direct control over the disbursement of 60% of their contribution, providing them the satisfaction of putting most of their money exactly where they want it. The other 40% would be allotted to programs legislated by the World Federation and administered by it. If people knew that after a certain income limit everything would be taken from them, what would be their incentive to keep working? What would cause them not to stop in midstream once they reach their income limit? Some would. So what? Let them stop. Mandatory work above the income limit with contributions to the World Charitable Trust would not be required. The money saved from the elimination of mass production of weapons of war would be sufficient to supply everyone's basic need. The 10% tithe of all that is earned worldwide on top of those savings would elevate all of society, not just the chosen few, to a new level of dignity and abundance. And the contribution of earnings above the agreed upon limit would produce such widespread opportunity and satisfaction for everyone that jealousy and social angers would virtually disintegrate. So some would stop working, especially those who saw their life activity as real work. Yet those who saw their activity as absolute joy would never stop. Not everyone can have a job like that. Untrue, everyone can. Joy at the workplace has nothing to do with function and everything to do with purpose. The mother who wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning to change her baby's diaper understands this perfectly. She hums and coos to the baby, and for all the world, it doesn't look like what she's doing is any work at all. Yet it is her attitude about what she is doing. It is her intention with regard to it. It is her purpose in undertaking this activity, which makes the activity a true joy. I have used this example of motherhood before because the love of a mother for her child is as close as you may be able to come to understanding some of the concepts of which I am speaking in this book and in this trilogy. Still, what would be the purpose of eliminating limitless earning potential? Wouldn't that rob the human experience of one of its greatest opportunities, one of its most glorious adventures? You would still have the opportunity and the adventure of earning a ridiculous amount of money. The upper limit on retainable income would be very high, more than the average person, the average 10 people would ever need. And the amount of income you could earn would not be limited simply by the amount you would choose to retain for personal use. The remainder, everything, say, over $25 million a year, I use a strictly arbitrary figure to make a point, would be spent for programs and services benefiting all humankind. As to the reason, the why of it, the upper retainable income limit would be a reflection of a consciousness shift on the planet, an awareness that the highest purpose of life is not the accumulation of the greatest wealth, but the doing of the greatest good and the corollary awareness that indeed the concentration of wealth, not the sharing of it, is the largest single factor in the creation of the world's most persistent and striking social and political dilemmas. The opportunity to amass wealth, unlimited wealth, is the cornerstone of the capitalistic system, a system of free enterprise and open competition that has produced the greatest society the world has ever known. The problem is, you really believe that. No, I don't, but I've mouthed it here on behalf of those who do believe it. Those who do believe it are terribly deluded and see nothing of the current reality on your planet. In the United States, the top 1.5% hold more wealth than the bottom 90%. The net worth of the richest 834,000 people is nearly $1 trillion greater than the poorest 84 million people combined. So, they worked for it. You Americans tend to see class status as a function of individual effort. Some have made good, so you assume that anybody can. That view is simplistic and naive. It assumes that everyone has equal opportunity when, in fact, in America, just as in Mexico, the rich and powerful strive and contrive to hold on to their money and their power and to increase it. So, what's wrong with that? They do so by systematically eliminating competition and institutionally minimizing true opportunity, and by collectively controlling the flow and the growth of wealth. This they accomplish through all manner of devices, from unfair labor practices which exploit the masses of the world's poor, to good old workboy network competitive practices which minimize and all but destroy a newcomer's chances of entering the inner circle of the successful. Then they seek to control public policy and governmental programs around the world to further ensure that the masses of people remain regulated, controlled, and subservient. I don't believe that the rich do this. Not the largest number of them. There may be a handful of conspirators, I suppose. In most cases, it isn't rich individuals who do it. It's the social systems and institutions they represent. These systems and institutions were created by the rich and powerful, and it is the rich and powerful who continue to support them. By standing behind such social systems and institutions, individuals can wash their hands of any personal responsibility for the conditions which oppress the masses, while favoring the rich and powerful. For example, let's go back to healthcare in America. Millions of America's poor have no access to preventative medical care. One cannot point to any individual doctor and say, this is your doing, this is your fault. That in the richest nation on earth, millions cannot get in to see a doctor unless they're in dire straits in an emergency room. No individual doctor is to blame for that, yet all doctors benefit. The entire medical profession and every allied industry enjoys unprecedented profits from a delivery system which has institutionalized discrimination against the working poor and the unemployed. And that's just one example of how the system keeps the rich rich and the poor poor. The point is that the rich and powerful who support such social structures and staunchly resist any real effort to change them, they stand against any political or economic approach which seeks to provide true opportunity and genuine dignity to all people. Most of the rich and powerful, taken individually, are certainly nice enough people with as much compassion and sympathy as anyone. But mention a concept as threatening to them as yearly income limits, even ridiculously high limits, such as $25 million annually, and they start whining about usurpation of individual rights, erosion of the American way, and lost incentives. What about the right of all people to live in minimally decent surroundings, with enough food to keep from starving, enough clothing to stay warm? What about the right of people everywhere to have adequate health care? The right not to have to suffer or die from relatively minor medical complications, which those with money overcome with a snap of a finger. The resources of your planet, including the fruits of the labors of the masses of indescribably poor, who are continually and systematically exploited, belong to all the world's people, not just those who are rich and powerful enough to do the exploiting. And here is how the exploitation works. Your rich industrialists go into a country or an area where there is no work at all, where the people are destitute, where there is abject poverty. The rich set up a factory there, offering those poor people jobs, sometimes 10, 12, and 14-hour-a-day jobs at substandard, if not to say subhuman, wages. Not enough, mind you, to allow those workers to escape their rat-infested villages, but just enough to let them live that way, as opposed to having no food or shelter at all. And then when they're called on it, these capitalists say, hey, they've got it better than before, don't they? We've improved their lot. The people are taking the jobs, aren't they? Why, we've brought them opportunity, and we're taking all the risk. Yet how much risk is there in paying people 75 cents an hour to manufacture sneakers which are going to sell for $125 a pair? Is this risk-taking or exploitation? Pure and simple. Such a system of rank obscenity could exist only in a world motivated by greed, where profit margin, not human dignity, is the first consideration. Those who say that relative to the standards in their society, those peasants are doing wonderfully, are hypocrites of the first order. They would throw a drowning man a rope but refuse to pull him to shore. Then they would brag that a rope is better than a rock. Rather than raising the people to true dignity, these haves give the world's have-nots just enough to make them dependent, but not enough to ever make them truly powerful. For people of true economic power have the ability to then impact and not merely be subject to the system. And that's the last thing the creators of the system want. So the conspiracy continues. And for most of the rich and powerful, it is not a conspiracy of action, but a conspiracy of silence. So go now, go your way, and by all means, say nothing about the obscenity of the socioeconomic system which rewards a corporate executive with a $70 million bonus for increasing sales of a soft drink, while 70 million people can't afford the luxury of drinking the stuff, much less eating enough to stay healthy. Don't see the obscenity of it. Call this the world's free market economy, and tell everyone how proud you are of it. Yet it is written, if thou wilt be perfect, go and sell what thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven. But when the young man heard this, he went away, sorrowful, for he had great possessions. That's the end.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I can't believe how week after week we'll be talking about something before we start the call, and I haven't read ahead, so I didn't know what I did not know what the subject matter was going to be. But the conversation we were just having about the article that Stephen Dinan wrote, I don't know, it just blows me away. And when I said right before the call started, that we need to treat each other gently while we're on our journeys, then on page 228 in my book, God says, it is not for you to judge the journey of another soul. It is for you to decide who you are, not who another has been or has failed to be. And I think that just underscored what I was saying, that we may not agree with each other. In fact, Neil says to God something about God says to Neil, you don't have to agree with me. This is a place of question. And I just kind of, as I was reading something else too, and for most of the rich and powerful, it is not a conspiracy of action, but a conspiracy of silence. And over the last couple of weeks, I have read several articles that said, in essence, this is not a time for you to stay in your seat or be silent. So anyway, with having said that, I wondered if anybody wanted to say something. Synchronicity at work. Yep, Brenna, you are correct. And welcome, Brenna.
Yeah, welcome.
And welcome, Anne.
And Shabana.
And everybody.
Yeah.
I'll just say I think it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. It's yeah. Yeah, it's perfect.
So divine how it all falls into place.
Yeah.
Well, and it's refreshing, and for those of us who've read these books before, it's nice to be reminded that it's refreshing to remember that everybody's on their own course. And, I may not understand something that God is saying in these pages, but that's okay. It's okay. I mean, and at that one point where Neil says, it's okay to disagree with God, he goes, certainly. What do you think I'm going to do? Squash you like an insect? I don't know. I feel like it really speaks to the times, not only in the U.S., but around the world. And anyway,
I love the discussion of wealth and the restructuring of the whole politics and that whole thing. I love the image that I get when I think about moving into a world political setup as opposed to what we've got now. And I love the idea of no money going into arms and taking all that money and doing better things with it.
I completely agree. And what I hope is that someday we get to this. That we get to this and people will know that we've got to take care of each other. We just have to.
I think we are getting to it, Nanette. I think we are. And, what's happening in my family right now and the rapidity of my brother-in-law's decline is, I don't know anybody's soul journey other than, I have to honor everybody's soul journey. And no matter what it appears to me, I don't know because, only the divine has power as we're, and the synchronicities that Brenna mentioned, they're just coming to us every week. And we are here in a community now talking from all over the world. It's a miracle, right? Like it is a miracle. And we are just waking up to how miraculous life is.
Yep. Thank you for that.
I was saying, Nanette, I love the fact, what it says about not putting money into arms. I think that's wonderful. But what can we do personally, each individually, to get to that point? What should we be doing to get to that?
Well, there's a reason I didn't write this book. I just split my lip because I laughed.
I have so many ideas about that. It's like, I really have all these ideas. I don't know if they're good ones or not, but I mean, I'm a little concerned about the way that, like, the way this book had to come about, because it was like almost fighting this like indoctrinated theology that has taken root in a lot of people's minds today. And I mean, I'm not sure how to like counter that, but I feel like a counterbalance with like a different theology would be helpful. But like community, outreach, concerts, stuff like that. Like a lot of people even go to church just because they like the music, and just being like a different kind of force that like drives people today, like a new kind of force, like, or then maybe not even force, maybe power is like a better word, but being like a new kind of like movement that kind of mimics the old movement, but like has the different message to it, if that makes sense. But I have a lot of ideas. Like there's all kinds of things that could happen. There's a lot of artists that are in like this like humanities team, a lot of people that could like come together in like if they're lawyers, they could come together to form like a council that could like hold people accountable in government. And you know that there's already people that do that now. Like the Republicans have their super PACs that like charge senators, presidents, Hillary Clinton, all those people. Like we could have like a group like that could like be holding people accountable in government. And you know, artists that would like, you know, spread the message through like music, art, all that stuff. In books, obviously Neil keeps writing books, and I mean there's so many ideas that I have, but I'm like I get stuck at the idea point, you know. It's like, how do you get that in motion?
Well, I think one of the things we can do is that, like, tomorrow is Awakening Day, December 12th. And it may not seem like a lot to do, but we are in this holiday season, and, you know, I like to do things like get business cards and just write on them and say, "You are loved," and then just put, you know, evolutionrevolution.net right on the card, and sticking them in instead of on the windshields, because here it's against the law to do the windshields. You can stick it into the side door in the window, you know. So you're technically not putting it on a. I don't know if that would stand up in a court of law, but I think about doing things like that. I don't know if I mentioned this on this call, but last Awakening Day, my granddaughter and I went around and I made flyers that just said "Love is the answer," and I couldn't believe, because we did put them on people's windshields on the street, that 3 or 4 cars that I walked past every single day had those. They left them in their cars. You know, they didn't trash it. They had it on their dashboard. And I thought, well, you know, I know 3 people got something out of it. You know, and I think that's where we got to start, because once we go down the rabbit hole of there's nobody who's conscious, then that's where we get in trouble. And the other thing too, Brenna, and I don't know if you heard the call with Pierre Pradervon, he's the one that blesses everybody. And when I drive up to my grocery store, and I live in a college town, so there's a lot of foot traffic and bicycle traffic, I just say out loud in my car, "Bless you, bless you, bless you, bless you, bless you." You know, I don't know if that energy is helpful to anybody, but it makes me feel a little bit better.
Well, being that there's only one, Nanette, it has to help. I apologize, Brenna.
No, Christine, go ahead, please.
I finished, Brenna.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I do that too, but I feel like if anything, this election, or even maybe the election of Barack Obama, showed us that, like, the amazing power of people being able to come together and do things as like a movement. And I really think that organizing some of Neil's ideas, and I mean, that's what Humanities Team does, but into like a movement where like it's an actual outreach and like community based, and it's the start of it. I think that's definitely happening, but like to really make that influence in the world, to be like a solidified presence, it's going to take a movement.
Can I say something?
Sure.
This is the 20th anniversary of the Season for Nonviolence, and the Association for Global New Thought and the Season for Nonviolence, they've always supported Global Oneness Day, but last week on the World Regions Call, I'm not only going to represent my community here in Victoria for the Seasons Nonviolence, but we're going to bring in Humanities Team. And on that call too, on the World Regions, we talked about bringing in closer ties with the HeartMath community, and we've always had close ties with the Shift community. So I think it really is happening. It is happening. These organizations coming together, merging together because we share the same heart space. I see that happening, Brenna.
And also, going back to Barbara Marx Hubbard and her work, anybody feeling called, start a circle, start your own circle. Even if only one or two other people come, you're still doing something and you're putting energy into the field. That's why a couple of days ago, I started a virtual meditation. You may have seen the post about it. And I was going to do it every Friday morning. And when we finished the first meditation, and all we were doing was just sending love into the unified field, specifically to the Electoral College, not in any kind of a partisan way, in a completely nonpartisan, just giving them love and compassion for the challenge that they have ahead. This December 19th is the most important meeting of the Electoral College perhaps that has ever occurred. And they need strength. They need to be able to make the right decision, and they need to feel safe making the decision that they believe is the right decision. And so at the end of that, several people on the call were like, I want to do this every day. I want to do it every day until the 19th. So that's what we're doing. And if only 2 of us or 3 of us come, it's still, we're having amazing experiences. We're getting and experiencing lots of disruption in the field. And so I feel like we all feel, the ones of us that have been doing it, that it's a positive thing to do, just sending love and compassion. So it starts with each of us, and when we circle up with other like-minded people, either virtually or locally, that's how it starts. And that's what Barbara Marx Hubbard has been saying since the 80s, is the way we're going to do this. It's going to start grassroots, and it's going to work its way up. And so although there are a lot of organizations already in place doing it, it's still not going to be any, I don't think any one of those organizations is going to end up in the lead. It's still going to come up this way, and they'll all be elevated, and they'll all eventually connect. I mean, Christine talked about the Do As One, and then there's the Amplifield, and then there's another one I just found, and there are all these meditation sites where you can go at any moment and join other people meditating and put an intention out there and have people come together. So I think that's it. For you personally, I would look around and find somebody in your locale of like-mindedness and get together either on the phone or a Zoom meeting or at a coffee shop, and just start. That's how it's going to happen, Brenna. And it's happening.
And you can meet virtually too. Barbara Max Hubbard, talking about her, my good friend. And, when we were trying to get 1 billion people to breathe together as one 5 years ago, and I told Barbara about Do As One Breath, I never heard about that, right? But Barbara has started up an Evolutionary Church, and it takes place every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific. And we just finished week 7, and it's a beautiful experience, and people come together from all over the world, and it's called the Evolutionary Church, and you can just go and look it up. And, I think this week we had, and it's based on positivity, and we always have Leonard Cohen's song, Hallelujah. That's our church song, right? And it's a beautiful experience of unity consciousness. And, we're further along now than we ever have been. And we are innocent beings, and the innocence got programmed incorrectly. That's simply all it is. And now we're waking up to our innocence, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm complete.
I was going to say, Brennan, you've got young kids, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Well, one of the things I do is I make she likes to do it. But I take my 6-year, or she just turned 8. I can't keep track of anything. I take her with me on these excursions, and like when the weather's permitting, we take the little red wagon and go door to door and ask people to donate food that we take to the food bank. And a kid is a great prop, if you will. Because when the little kid is saying, do you have a can of tuna or a can of beans or whatever they're asking, they usually can't resist becoming part of that. And not only are you doing something good for the community, but you're also doing something good for your kids, because my older kids remember me doing these random kind act things, and they'd be like, Mom, kind of embarrassing. I said, well, no, it's not. And I said, and I did it so often that it became, they just knew I was going to do it, so they didn't get embarrassed anymore. And it's the same thing if you do a free hugs event. And I remember I was so nervous the first time I did free hugs, because boy, oh boy, if you're saying free hugs, that's for anybody that walks up to you. It's free hugs for everybody. And every single time I've had a free hugs event, I felt so super duper on top of the world, because there is no discrimination. There can't be. If you got a sign that says free hugs, it's not free hugs except for if you are blah, blah, blah. So there are things that I think we can do, but I don't think the conversation should stop, Brenna. I think we should, do some brainstorming as a group. And I did notice that it's just after 1. And if anybody else wants to add anything before we close it down.
My deep love and compassion for each of us.
Yes. And I do have an announcement. Michelle is going to take some time away from the book club. She just wants to have some Sunday time to herself. And we love you and appreciate you, Michelle. And
thank you.
You will be missed. But
I love and appreciate you guys too.
Okay. All right, everybody. Go do our good works. And I love you all.
Thank you for reading, Michelle.
Thank you for your great ideas, Brenna.
And thank you, Michelle, for all your contributions, and a peaceful Sunday.
I'll still be making them in different ways. You're welcome.
All right. Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Bye.